Watch this. No way!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cricket Jar Golf Podcast. I am Tom Mills. Today I'm joined by Bruce and Sam, and fuck me, boys, is it a big one?
Get an early expletive in there, commensurate with the state of the nation.
I just want to say I'm not on board with such an early expletive that hits the eardrum so offensively like that. It has been a pretty remarkable 24 hours, though. I will give you that.
Well, we're hoping to release this on the 24th hour anniversary of the news being delivered to us via pop-up on BBC Sport or whatever, however you receive your sport news. I mean, see it coming?
No
I don't
way.
think anyone did.
It's one of those really weird things, though, where, you know, have you ever seen Lord of War?
With Nicolas Cage, very good film, actually.
Yeah. So, you know, at the end of Lord of War, it's like he gets done, doesn't he, with the bullet in his brother's body, and he's like gets pinned as being like this unbelievable arms dealer that's just like, you're like, oh, that's it then. He's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. And then he like sort of explains to him, well, what's going to happen is this guy's going to knock on the door in 5 minutes' time. You'll be pulled outside. I'll be given a pardon. And I'll be back to business by Monday. It's kind of like maybe as the viewer watching golf and seeing this all play out in the media, we're all running around in like a frenzy going, well, Liv aren't making any money. And yet there's some straight backdoor deal that just seems to have opened up for them, which says, there you go. Public investment fund have a valid seat at the house now and a seat at the table when it comes to, you know, sports, governance of the game of golf. There's obviously some Faustian deal there between the PGA and Liv to basically make the whole problem go away. And I think the fact that no one saw this coming speaks to the naivety of maybe how this huge level commerce works across the world, perhaps. I don't know. Just crazy.
Do you think this was the end goal the whole time? Nothing about a different league, nothing about different, all this stuff. They just wanted the seat at the table with the PGA.
Yeah, I think they want control. I think that it's not necessarily. Yeah, it's tricky. Maybe they didn't envisage Liv being the final form. They ultimately, the PIF just wants control over the most important tour in professional golf.
Didn't they? They want to be seen to be acceptable in a number of different sporting arenas. I mean, I think the term sport washing is bandied around pretty willy-nilly, but it does feel like that gives them it validates them, doesn't it? You know, and I think that's ultimately what they're looking for. They weren't this. I think it's quite hard for anyone to believe that the creation of Liv was in it for the purity of creating a team-based aspect to golf, professional golf.
The thing is, the Saudi money's been in golf for so long. It's been there for ages. No one's worried about the Aramco. No one's worried about, you know, their investments in big golf brands, you know, like, and big golf companies. Like, no one really kicked up a fuss. In fact, the only time anyone really kicked up a fuss about anything is when there was a rival tour.
Yeah,
that was what they were worried about.
But it feels like a much bigger play than it has been in football. Not that I can say I follow football particularly closely, but I guess Newcastle United, that is still within the ecosystem of. Sound like Keith Pelly, actually, don't I? Because that was the word that Keith Pelly kept throwing around, you know, working within the ecosystem. And yeah, Newcastle United and the PIF's investment into football and the Premier League in that sense has been within the bounds of like the existing structure, whereas they've wanted a breakaway tour, essentially a different tour with a very different format. It might not be the final format, but it's 54 holes. There's a lot more team-based competition. It's just a very different format of professional golf. And I think that's probably been a key part of the discord and the acrimony between the PGA Tour and Liv. But what's so remarkable about this, and I guess, you know, the kind of slightly hesitant recording this podcast because it's going to be out of date before we've even released
this will
it.
Age like milk, to use your expression.
Yeah, obviously McIlroy's due to give a press conference, in the morning Canadian time, which we've not heard yet. And maybe that'll just lift the lid and give us a lot more to potentially go out in the future. But like, it seems like no one's really been involved. It seems like it's been Jay Monahan and Yasser from the PIF and maybe a couple of other people on the side. Like, apparently Greg Norman's not been involved, and yet these discussions have been ongoing for months. So it's clearly shocked everyone, and the outcry on Twitter from professional PGA Tour members, the likes of Morikawa, apparently Grayson Murray went absolutely nuts at the player meeting yesterday afternoon, which was on site with Jay Monahan at the Canadian Open. And, I'm sure he wasn't the only one, but it's just clearly taken everyone by great surprise.
We start with
the Murray thing was interesting.
Who's got fact?
Who's got fact?
Yeah.
Well, the Grayson Murray thing is quite interesting. We'll talk about that, I suppose, in a little bit. Let's rewind slightly. So I've spent my last night, because I'm really sad, looking at the timeline of Live. So
we're coming up to the anniversary of the RNGC Open, which was played the day after the first event.
But it was
Centurion.
announced in October 21. Is when they first came out and said they are looking to do something. And this is about the same time the sort of Premier Golf League was still ideas were still being bandied about, and round about the same time that we were still doing pods on the professional game, which we stopped a little while ago, but this feels like we should do it anyway. And then they were hoping to release it in the spring of 22. So if you think about that, like, it's only really been going for like a year and a bit, really, in terms of playing golf. In March 22, they announced Greg Norman was going to be involved, and then kind of all kicks about. The first one was in June, wasn't it?
Yeah. So RNGC is happening this weekend.
Yeah.
And we went to the Friday at Centurion to watch it. So I would say it's almost a year to the day.
June the 11th. It was June the 11th was Charles Schwartzel picked up the first Live competition. But it's weird because you go back to sort of June 9th, and that was when Jay Monahan was like going out on the Canadian Open and said, and I quote, "I think you'd have to be living under a rock not to know the significant implications as it relates to the families of 9/11. I've got two families close to me that lost loved ones, so my heart goes out to them, and I would ask any player that's left or any player that's ever considered leaving, have you ever had to apologize for being a member of the PGA Tour?" I mean, the hypocrisy is absolutely
I think it's fair to say,
outlandish.
Jay, by the time people pick this up on Thursday morning, there's a pretty level chance that Jay Monahan won't be in a job by tomorrow morning, isn't there? I think that's...
Well,
it's weird though, isn't it? Because he's been criticised, to no end, even before this news broke yesterday, for his conduct and the way he's just handled it, and he's not been particularly charismatic. And yeah, I'm just trying to think of an analogy for that guy who is just universally sort of hated or despised, and yet somehow manages to just go on indefinitely. It's
skin like a
really
rhino.
remarkable.
He must have. I mean, you can imagine how thick-skinned he must be. I mean, he was asleep at the wheel before the Live thing, because the whole thing, which has been the biggest success of the PGA Tour, has been the designated events, hasn't it? And all of a sudden, that's come as a byproduct of Live, as a reaction to that. Now, I think we need to get into the debate as to whether who wins and what will be better and what will be worse as a result of it. The danger is this becomes a navel-gazing exercise, looking at morality and all of that stuff, which quite rightly will happen and will continue to rage. But as a direct result of yesterday's announcement, my understanding is that the Public Investment Fund can buy a stake in PGA Tour, and there will be a change to the governance structure of the PGA Tour. Fundamentally, it will cease to be a not-for-profit entity, and there will be a branch of it which will be a for-profit thing, which radically changes the whole optics of all of this stuff. Then the Public Investment Fund can buy into that for-profit entity. That will presumably deliver some significant injection of cash from Saudi. I'm guessing that has to come at the expense of something, be it endorsements, be it locations, be it where the schedule takes it. Live could be mothballed because there's going to be a review as to how successful that has been. Question mark. But then where that goes from there, what that means, I have absolutely no idea. Does that mean you have a Saudi silent partner to the tune of 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% stake in the PGA Tour? I don't know what any of that means. So
Well, it's all so vague at the moment, I think, because the word they keep throwing around was a framework agreement, a framework agreement and a merger of their respective kind of commercial entities, really, and golf-related businesses. But it's really, really vague. Framework is certainly not a final form document or, agreement. It's just pretty broad brush at the moment. But I guess it is, to some degree, it's legally binding, and it has, a great deal of sort of weight behind it. But yes, Sam, as you were saying there, it's all quite unclear because PGA Tour Inc. is going to remain in place separately as this 501c6 tax-exempt not-for-profit organisation. It's going to retain some sort of administrative oversight of the PGA Tour events. I mean, I'm just looking at the statement now because it's just sort of so kind of
opaque,
turgid and opaque. Yeah. The PGA Tour Inc. will retain administrative oversight of events of those assets contributed by the PGA Tour, including the sanctioning of events, administration of competition and rules, blah, 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 inside the ropes responsibilities. Jay Monahan is apparently going to stay on as commissioner, and then Ed Herlihy as PGA Tour Policy Board chairman. But then PIF's governor, Yasir Al-Rumayyan, will join the PGA Tour Policy Board, and the DP World Tour and Live Golf will retain similar administrative oversight of events on their respective tours. So certainly in the interim, there's going to be a bit of a maintenance of the status quo, I think. Like, it's not like all of a sudden the Live schedule is going to be merged into the PGA Tour schedule and we're going to, have a rethink
Jimmy
on the
Dunn's
remainder of
heavily
professional
involved
golf.
here, isn't he?
Yeah.
Jimmy Dunn's all of a sudden now, very much part of sort of a lot of the stuff that's happening on this, which in itself is quite strange. Like, Jimmy Dunn obviously I think was a financier in New York. Tragically, his office was impacted by the 9/11 attack. He's quite famous for having supported all of his employees' families and kids through that process with their schooling fees and everything like that. He's looked up to within the US in the game. That whole optic of all of that stuff is very, very strange now. All of a sudden, with this merger, and
he only came on the policy board last November, though. Jimmy Dunn did, and clearly,
but now he's sat in, to an extent, must be some sort of architect of all this.
Definitely,
I think the odd part of this is that Saudi money, dodgy money, oil money has been in everything forever, and it was ever thus. It's nothing new. I think the problem was that when something came along that the PGA didn't agree with, the PGA Tour didn't agree with, they kind of all jumped on this money bandwagon because it was easy. Because they were like, oh yeah, look, this horrible money, you shouldn't go there. Instead of just having a better product or just knowing that they were going to be better, they decided to sort of throw egg and try and blame it all on the money, which was so short-sighted for loads of different reasons. First of all, because there's loads of oil money, Saudi money, dodgy money in the game anyway. But second of all, if you're going to eventually get into bed with them, it leaves you nowhere to go. I mean, there's loads to go on here.
Well, Jay Monahan's sort of saying, he said, I appreciate I might sound like I've contradicted previous statements and I seem like a hypocrite, and I accept those criticisms. All I can say to that is that, what I said was on the basis of the information I had available at the time and my best judgment. And it's like,
nothing's changed.
The natural question there is, when so much of the thrust of your previous argument was based around the morality sort of argument, the morality piece, the 9/11 families, Saudi funding of terrorism, that sort of stuff. The natural follow-up now is like, okay, Jay, what book did you read that sort of put to bed your concerns of Saudi Arabia having some involvement in 9/11 and the funding of terrorism? Clearly the information that you have available to yourself now has changed, but obviously he's not going to, he's just left himself open to huge criticism.
The information that's changed is he's been offered more bloody money.
Yeah. So it'll
be absolutely untenable, won't it? I mean,
it's untenable. I think.
I think will become there's. I mean, Tom, last night when we were catching up on WhatsApp together with the three of us, and you just fired into about half a dozen, I thought, very, very fair questions. Can you illuminate us?
Well, I mean, there were things that banded around on Twitter, you can see, but it's kind of, you think about, if you are, let's take Rory McIlroy. That's probably a bad example. Let's say Will Zalatoris. There we go. Will Zalatoris was reportedly, if you believe Fred Couples, offered $130 million to go to live, and he turned it down, and now he's going to work for the Saudis anyway.
Well, he's now injured, earning nothing this year.
Well,
he's off the whole thing with back injury.
When he plays, he'll be playing for the people he turned down, except he would have been 130.
So is he 130 in the hole? Is that money then going to have to be paid back from the players into PGA Tour, the sort of for-profit side of the business, to be redistributed to?
Well, that's a fair question, isn't it? What
what do you do? Do you go back to DJ and say, like, yeah, you got that sort of, I'm guessing, what, 600-700 million?
125 million, DJ.
$125 million.
Yeah.
So what does he put that back into a pot and say, well, that get a portion? Do you all of a sudden just start running a PIP calculator that's like just much more complex?
Well, arguably,
absolutely no idea. Is Stenson the captain of the Ryder Cup side now? I don't know.
Well, arguably these people like Dustin Johnson, these are all sort of reported numbers: 125 million, DeChambeau 100 million, Sergio 35 million. You know, they work their weight in gold for the Saudis, because without them on their breakaway, they'd have no ability to get to the table. So the fact they've
no leverage.
Yeah, so they've got what they want. I mean, the weirdest question, the most pertinent question I can think of is, what's the attraction? Because live is shit. Like, it's getting no viewers. It's not really attracting anything. It hasn't been able to secure any substantial sponsorship. Like, what is it that the PGA Tour have been like, yeah, we have to be on board with this?
But it seems to me that the discussions here have been ongoing for 7 months at least. I don't know if that figure rings a bell with any of you guys, but it seems like they've been going on for quite some time. I mean, there was, without wanting to go off on too much of a tangent, that interview, the joint interview that Yasser and Monahan gave yesterday, where they talked about, Yasser was like, oh yeah, we met in London, we had lunch, we played golf, had some more lunch. It's like, I wonder where that was happening for a start. Like, point one, like, which sort of caddy master or
I could hazard a guess,
club pro has sort of spotted that and thought, put two and two together and thought, bloody hell, I wonder what's going on here, because that's just quite interesting. But yeah, I guess point two is, it seems that one of the main reasons for doing this, on the basis of the information we have right now, sound like Jay Monahan, is to put an end to all this litigation. And I wonder, Mills, just to answer your question, if that's the main impetus here is yeah, okay, Liv's not a brilliant product at the moment, but they've had some close calls at the Masters, obviously, placed very highly there. Koepka's gone on and won the PGA. There's no saying that other players on the PGA Tour won't just sort of bit by bit drip away and go over to Live. So by the looks of things, I think the PGA Tour is trying to get ahead of it and stop that, and also wants to put an end to litigation that could potentially cost them millions and millions of pounds that they just probably don't want to spend.
Is there an argument to say that Koepka has changed the golfing landscape forever? If he had not won this the PGA, do you think there's like a
I think that's a stretch to think the PGA would have been. I don't think Jay Monahan saw Brooks win the PGA and thought, right, well, that's it. We're gonna have to incorporate this, because we can't. I think that's a stretch, but I think there's a small nebulous of players in the form of DJ, Brooks, DeChambeau, people like maybe Garcia, like you've already mentioned. There's some big names in there that's clearly what's been the bargaining chip, and that's going to drive like untold animosity amongst the players now, almost more so, because if you were the whole Rory and Bryson thing, or Patrick, whatever, you can kind of to an extent tolerate some of that, because it's like, well, yeah, you took the money, I disagree with you, but you've made that decision. They'll just leave it. Now they're back and they sort of have to be bedfellows. That will be an altogether different proposition, I suspect.
But that will be a long time coming.
Yeah.
I think
what will change in the game as a direct result. Like, okay, there won't be a Live series that we won't watch. Okay, so that's a factor. Will those guys now start? Will the designated events all of a sudden become absolutely unreal because you will have all of them playing? That's a pretty fair guess, I suppose. Does the introduction of a for-profit status for an organization that has a monopoly on what I understand to be now every single registered tour across the planet.
Well, it will be, yeah.
Pretty much of
DP
any
World,
size.
PGA, and the Asian.
The Asian tour, MENA tour, like every tour. They now have for-profit status, whereas before they were not-for-profit status. That's surely the elephant in the room. Like, I have no idea how that...
Well, competition law. Yeah, raises huge questions on competition law there, doesn't it? It's like if you wrap the whole thing up...
Profit, yeah.
Yeah, if you wrap the whole thing up there into one for-profit entity that is basically comprised LIV, the PGA Tour, I guess PGA Tour, Latin America, the DP World Tour, and I guess an extension of that will be the Challenge Tour, Corn Ferry. If all of this is wrapped up, the pathways there are just now basically under all one entity. Is that reasonable? Is that in breach of competition law? I guess time's going to tell, isn't it? But
I think
it seems rushed, doesn't it? It's just, I think what was so galling about it is it does appear, to all intents and purposes, there are about 4 or 5 people who are having these discussions. They kept the circle so tight for so many months, and they've just announced it. And yeah, I don't know how many lawyers or accountants are out there that have been advised and being like, you're never going to guess what's happening. Like what we're advising on at the moment, it's a PGA Tour LIV merger. You'd have thought some of that might have trickled through and someone might have had an early sighter of this. I can't think of any bit of news like this in golf that has been this monumental, that's been kept secret for so long. I mean, it was just so far out of left field, wasn't it?
When you think about, you said his parents been gone for 7 months and who knew? You can go back and look at things in the timeline of LIV and ask slightly different questions about them. So I'll give you an example. Just after Dustin Johnson led the 4 aces to the first LIV Championship, did you even know that the 4 aces won the? I didn't know.
I think I knew that, but I wasn't that close to the specifics.
Dustin Johnson led the 4 aces to the first LIV. Anyway, that was October 30th. November 15th, 2022. Rory McIlroy gave this statement. Greg needs to go. He needs to exit stage left. He's made his mark, but I think now's the right time to say, you've got this thing off the ground, but no one's going to talk unless there's an adult in the room that can actually try to mend fences. Then 2 weeks later, exactly 2 weeks later, Tiger Woods then said, I think Greg has to go. First of all, and then obviously litigation against us and our countersuit against them, those would then have to stay as well. Then we can talk and we can all talk freely. So they were clearly aware that they were talking about something. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise, why would they even bother about Greg being there? They must have been aware that
it's hard to, I certainly don't think Rory was in the know on anything. It's interesting, isn't it? Things like that, designated events. There was something in that Netflix series, which is definitely not how you should consume everything, because it's clearly heavily dramatized. But when they did that announcement around the designated events, it was quite interesting how Rory it was in that documentary that they were essentially blindsided about some of the rules and stuff around how many of those designated events the players had to play. So this feels like an almighty bit of blindside. I remember some of the guys on DP World Tour saying, look, when that whole strategic alliance came out, they were completely blindsided by that. So that's nothing new. I'm curious. I think this pod absolutely has space for conjecture. And I think this pod will age, to use Bruce's expression, like milk. I mean, this will be out of date before we've even published it. But whilst we're here, we might as well try and sort of time capsule a few predictions. I am curious, gentlemen, who is going to be... My first question is, who's going to be the great winner out of this? And that could be anything, whether it's the viewer, Saudis, Jay, Rory, Bryson, you name it. Who's going to be the best winner at the end of all this? And who's going to be the greatest loser at the end of this, when it all shakes out?
I'll answer a slightly different question. Maybe I'll answer the same question.
Can you answer my question? I don't know.
No. I think Phil Mickelson has come out looking like a guy who plays chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Yeah, I was going to say.
He's come out of this like a fucking genius. He's foretold all this stuff, and it's like he's got 200 million quid in the bank just for turning up to LIV. He's run his mouth off, and now he's going to be back on the PGA Tour. And he's a big winner, but he looks like he's just there pulling all the strings.
So you think Phil could be the great winner of all this, Bruce? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think could be the great winner in maybe a literal sense, financial sense. I still don't think that that people are probably going to forget too quickly how he conducted himself last year, and some of the comments and the sort of duplicitous nature. The big loser, you've got to think one way or the other, Jay Monahan. He can't come out of this well. If he is somehow able to maintain his status as commissioner of the PGA Tour, or some sort of, leadership position in this new entity, that would be remarkable, because it just seems like everyone is dead against him at the moment. I think we'll learn a huge amount more.
I'd say Greg Norman. I mean, you got to think Monahan's taken a chunk of change out of this somehow.
Yeah, and you don't see his name mentioned much.
Why would he suicidally throw himself at this, Jay Monahan, if there was no upside for him personally? He strikes me as a pretty self-serving individual, so I would have thought that.
No, financially, yeah, but you got to think his
just in
reputation's
some way,
going to be
shape, or
trashed.
form. Whereas I think Greg Norman, he's essentially made himself persona non grata, was he? He's not welcome at the Masters. He's not welcome at the Open. He's been ostracised. And he's now going to be completely shelved as a result of this.
Reports also said that he's not involved in the immediate structure, and there were reports that he didn't find out until the same time we found out.
Brilliant.
I mean, could you imagine that? We are going to find out that one day where Greg's been like, found out at the same time as you. I was absolutely mortified. Yeah.
I mean,
put my heart and soul into this thing for like 8 months. But it could, if that turns out to be the case, it would just be crazy. I mean, Rory, again, Sam, take on board your point about there's room for conjecture here. Obviously, a huge amount of the sort of Twitter sphere last night was focused on Rory and what a sort of outspoken hero he's been for the PGA Tour, the sort of ardent defender of the PGA Tour, and keeping up the morality argument, sort of message to young kids: don't just go and do stuff because you're offered a boatload of money. And everyone's thinking, well, he's the one who's really been shafted here. He's been massively thrown under the bus. He's been Monahan's sort of staunchest defender, and he's not even been consulted by this. I feel like he probably has been consulted. I guess we'll know very, very shortly after we've finished recording this podcast. He's going to give that press conference at the RBC Canadian Open. But it seems to me that he would have found out, or at least got the gist of the way things were going, a few weeks, maybe a couple of months ago. He's probably been a professional and kept his mouth shut, but just sort of frustratingly had to go along with it. But I think he's probably found out. I wonder if his sort of streaky play recently, because he was playing so well at the back end of last year, and then coming into this year, he won in Dubai, didn't he? Just beat Patrick Reed. He seemed really up for it, and then all of a sudden just goes and has a nightmare at the Masters and some fairly patchy performances since then. Didn't get it done at the Memorial. There
was a bit of a protest vote with that. Yeah, pulling out.
I just wonder if that's linked.
Was a big thing. Whether that was a sort of a toys out the pram, so you think you're going to do this? Well, sod this. I'm not playing in this. And I mean, that's all just it is pure conjecture.
Do you think Netflix are just pulling all the strings? They just want a better TV series, so they're like, "Oh, this is what we're gonna just do this." So we've got
great on that. They were like, "Yeah, we've got this on camera. Don't worry, guys." Which in itself is quite strange to actually have, recorded media there capturing this stuff when seemingly all but a very small handful of people are completely blindsided by it all.
I think Rory could be a big loser out of this, because we all love Rory. Rory's amazing, but I feel like he's been worked like a puppet. He's said whatever the PGA have said, that wanted him to say. He said it. He's come out. He's been so against everything. And if he doesn't die on that hill now, if he just carries on like nothing's changed, he comes out looking a bit like a fool. So I don't know how he wins out of this.
He's a bit of a victim of the platform and his success and his own.
Yeah, I don't know how he comes out of this,
because he can't not comment on it. And then when he comments on it, he's now been made to look like a complete arse. And that's okay if you're Jay Monahan, because you get the sense that this guy doesn't really give a monkeys about his own personal image. Someone like Rory, that is a really difficult situation to be in. It's also really difficult for on any number of levels as well. What had changed whereby people's ability to play in events, now that changes massively as well. So you're a staunch supporter of the PGA Tour that may be sort of outside the world top 50. Things are looking better for a year or so because you're going to get more starts. What happens now? We're going to bring in lost track of the numbers. 48 players or whatever out of LIV, out of the teams or something like that.
And
that
more.
are going to
play an Asian tour.
That just all of a sudden drop in out of 2020 into the 2024 calendar. So you're now bumped to what? Corn Ferry? Does that then start to impact Corn Ferry? Do then the players that are going to progress through that? There's untold consequences in here. Just pinning you guys for a prediction. Biggest news to come out of the next week that sits in front of us. That will also age like milk, I suspect. I'm going to put a stick in the ground and say Jay Monahan not being essentially sacked by the pack. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the next week. Any other large predictions?
I'm going to predict that Jay Monahan. You heard it here. Maybe first. Depends on if anyone else has said it. Jay Monahan refuses to go, and 90% of the PGA Tour quit. That's what I'm going with.
I think there's scope for a strike. There's scope for a player strike. There's scope for a player strike. Yeah.
Yeah, if they all just refused to play the Canadian Open, RBC would go nuts, wouldn't they? I mean, the Canadian Open's a designated event, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it doesn't matter anymore. What on earth does that matter? They're just going to play in a LIV event next year.
Well, no, because LIV will get mothballed, won't it? LIV will just cease to exist.
I think that what LIV was trying to do, which is these, I mean, they said it started with 8 and it was 10, 12, doesn't really matter, but there will be basically what the designated events are with all the top players, and there'll only be 8 of them, and they'll only play in that. I think those top players will only play in the majors and those designated events, and then the PGA Tour will be like Div 2. And the European Tour, the DP World Tour, will be Div 3. And that's how it's going to unfold. It might be sort of globalized a bit, but...
The team element is very, very strongly... it comes through very strongly in that press release they put out. Definitely. I don't think that's going anywhere. I'd be surprised if the shotgun start element remains. But I think the team side of things will. I mean, there's talk now about Nike. Again, it's all conjecture, it's all on the rumour mill, but some of it is believable. Like Nike might try and buy a franchise for $2 billion and just load it with their athletes. And you can see how it could be quite a compelling vision for sponsors if they have everything now under one roof and they've almost had because the PGA Tour has sort of sanctioned the acceptability of Saudi money, really, hasn't it? And where sponsors perhaps were reluctant to get involved with LIV because of the public perception of it, they might just be willing to say, well, in time, this merger with the PIF and the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, that's just given it an air of legitimacy. We don't need to worry about it being affiliated with Saudi money anymore. And we'll go and throw some cash at some franchises, and we'll try and get Rory, Jason Day, our other Nike athletes, Scheffler, all packed up into one team. That could be quite exciting. I mean, the other, perhaps much less likely scenario, but it is a scenario nonetheless, is that you have someone say, no, fuck this, we don't want to be involved in it. Let's go and try and set up our rival tour.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Let's go do Tiger and Rory's new venture that they've started. Yeah. Maybe they're just like, right, okay. Well, we're 90% of the pulling power of golf in between Rory and Tiger alone. They'll presumably have a lot of goodwill with other top players in the OWGR. Let's just go and do our own thing.
You can see that whole thing where they're going town to town in America just
for well, that's 6 months solid, just the two of them.
No, but that's what like the LPGA, like where they were going town to town in their cars. You got like people like Patty Berg and Babes Zaharias and stuff, just literally just developing their own tour from the road. Like imagine, like it wouldn't actually be that hard for a walkout of, unless they handled it right. If you the players could just literally say, all right, we'll sort of cash the chips in here.
If you had Tiger, Rory, Rahm, Scheffler, Morikawa, there's a few other guys who've signed up to the Tiger and Rory kind of like league events thing. If you had 10 or 12 of those guys all sign up and say, we're going to go and do our own thing, that would be
have the same problem on the hands again, wouldn't they? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, again, Tiger is the needle in golf. So he gets you most of the way there. Rory gets you a significant amount as well of sort of political capital.
Yeah,
and
the
then
rest
if you've got some of the best players in the world. Yeah, what it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it will be. It will be fascinating. I suspect the public investment fund will have a minority share. They would the PGA will always have the majority, as I understanding. How the voting structure of this works across the player council versus the other board of directors that you have to assume are in it for slightly different reasons, versus the public investment fund that also have their own agenda. In there probably lies where the decisions will be made. My guess is like the PGA Tour for the large part until now is a player-run organisation. And whilst I'm sure there's other commercial interests that feed into those decisions, it feels like that might not be the case. And, you know, certainly the big athletes are not going to want to lose that power.
I think we're in for a interesting few weeks. I think it's going to be quite explosive through the US Open and even up to the Open. Going to be a fascinating few weeks. Really, really.
Yeah. I mean,
he's going
to be giving his press conference any moment now. I mean, this podcast could go out of date quicker than a pint of milk left on a barbecue on a hot summer's day or something. It could just absolutely go sour really quite quickly.
Yeah, but it could be turned into some really nice cream.
Who knows? I imagine is that I imagine that the more likely scenario is that we don't actually hear all that much for a few weeks.
I just think he'll say a few words and that's about it, really. But
yeah, and things are kind of rumble on, this framework agreement and the finer details of it all get hashed out. And yeah, I think the immediate future is that the PGA Tour carries on with its schedule of events and LIV carries on with its schedule of events into next year. Maybe next year there's some movement. Maybe it's the year after. Who knows? I think the more pressing, practical issue will be the official world golf rankings and those players who've been kept out of winning world ranking points, say for in the majors. I imagine that concern hasn't gone away and they want to get that ability to accrue world ranking points, improve their position and get into majors.
Do they get retrospective points?
Can they? Yeah, you got to doubt it.
Some of them can't qualify because of the way that they've been missing out on points. It's absolutely mental.
Yeah.
The real
strange.
sad part of yesterday is that it did get in the way of quite an important poll we were running on our own social media, which was for the best sausage roll in the game. And I feel like, it's a shame when big news like that gets eclipsed by even bigger news. For the benefit of our listeners, understanding Royal Lytham was the top rated sausage roll.
Best sausage roll in Britain and Ireland.
In the British game, yeah.
Never tried it.
No, I haven't either. But apparently it's sliced lengthways and the condiment is arranged down the middle of the roll.
Wow.
There's no halfway house at Lytham. Where do they eat their sausage roll?
Exactly. I, to be fair, never said it had to be served in. I did say halfway sausage roll. Maybe I've got to look at their own rules on that. But Woburn was a close run second with an onion chutney within the pastry beneath the sausage roll.
Yeah, the Woburn one is pretty amazing. I've not had one for a while, but yeah, it's worth going back to. I mean, they do great bacon sandwiches as well. So they've just got the sort of salty pork-based foods with a good helping of carbs. That sort of niche of the menu captured. King's Barnes as well, actually. There's a great sausage roll. I was surprised to see that not do better in the rankings. But yeah, it's fair to say there are a good number of contenders, aren't there, for the halfway?
Just big news, wasn't there, yesterday? Just got eclipsed. Really,
it was like, I don't know if you remember. I think when Hillary Clinton and Trump were first going for were first battling out for the presidency, I think Hillary Clinton was about to drop some sort of political masterpiece, and then literally about the same time, Grabbed by the Pussy came out and just eclipsed all the news. So she couldn't really drop this thing because Grabbed by the Pussy came out, and it was like, oh right, okay, swamped that news. That's gone. So the sausage roll news is gone.
Trump predicted this.
I was going to say, that's quite. I don't know if you knew what you were doing there, Mills, but Trump did. Yeah. That was a very good segue because he did predict this, didn't he? His tweet
I think
from
it's really naive to think that this is pieced together by Jay Monahan, Yasser, a few other people in the inner circle. Like, this is pretty macro, like, world politics stuff.
Well, and Trump was also quite into LIV, wasn't he? They had events at
Bedminster and Doral.
Which is why it's back to like that, without sounding too much like I'm sat here with my tinfoil hat on here and stuff as a conspiracy theorist, but there does feel like the world of big politics is very much at play with this sort of stuff. The naivety that, there was all this rhetoric spouted 12 months ago and then they just, and we're shocked because they've kind of done a complete U-turn on it. I suppose, this is the big leagues of, government level conversations, to get this stuff through. This is not something that's cooked up by a half dozen lawyers and a few guys on a golf course in London. Like it would 100% need a lot more than that.
You'd think so. I mean, Jimmy Dunn is apparently the architect of it. He had the first meeting with Yasser from the PIF, according to sources out there. I guess time will tell. Someone will write a book on this one day, and it will make a pretty compelling read.
Shitnock is writing the book as well.
Maybe he's the
self-appointed author of all things.
Yeah. But yeah, it's right. I think the stuff that is just unpalatable, I guess, to summarize, is that if Monahan and the PGA Tour had come out and just said, well, they're a competitor and they're offering a different product and it's a competitive landscape, that's obviously what people want to hear. The moral argument really is what's soured the whole thing. If Monahan wasn't so taking that moral high ground and then just doing a complete U-turn at this point in time, then it probably would be a little bit more palatable, really.
I'm also
it's just the
I'm also been troweling Twitter, and you remember when it all first came out, everyone and their dog were talking about Jamal Khashoggi, and all the people are going to live were murderers, or it's just where do they go? Where do those keyboard warriors go? They can't warrior themselves.
Yeah.
What are they going to do now?
And there's also a shitload of live bot accounts that are going to need completely reconfiguring as a result of this. There's tons of them.
Well, it's good for the computer programmers of the world, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess the other issue is that the girl who had the handle on Instagram Live Golf, which meant that Live Golf had to go instead for Live Golf League. I mean, she should have sold
She's lost
early,
all
really.
of her leverage.
She could have made quite a bit of money for that Instagram handle, but you got to think that's probably
whereas the
decreased in
vintage
value
Live
now.
Golf apparel that they were selling down at Centurion is now going to be worth loads of money now. You couldn't give that stuff away. That stuff's going to be so niche. 30 years time, that stuff's going to be if you got a Cleeks hat, that'll change hands for telephone numbers on eBay.
Well, 4 Aces is going to be the big one, isn't it? Something that Dustin wore at 4 Aces. Yeah, everyone knows I was a big Fireballs guy, but look, let's keep our ear to the ground on this one and maybe not go a year without commenting on it. So let's see how this sort of pans out over the next 6 to 8 weeks, and maybe revisit this and see how our predictions have aged.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening. If you have any comments, please do fire them at Sam Williams and nobody else. And gentlemen, until next time.
Adios.
Adios.
This